Hello, and welcome back to the Nothing Notable podcast. Today, we start our weekly Season 2 Euphoria recaps. Jack Hubert and Daniel Elmore. Maybe Tyler will join us if he catches up.
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
We got the Season 2 premiere. It's been a long-awaited season premiere for fans of Euphoria. I was watching the show pretty much from day one. You just got caught up, so you're like in the throes of Euphoria. Take me through just your overall thoughts on the show, season 1, real quick before we get into season 2.
Well, so, my experience with it is I watched it I watched episode 1 back in the winter of 2019, and then just never got around to watching the rest of it. And then, heard that the new season was coming out, and we're all about that sweet, sweet content over here.
Very sweet.
So I'm like, yeah, I'll catch up. And, really enjoyed the first season. Aesthetically, it's one of the most beautiful shows I've ever watched. I love kind of how strong all the characters are in it, and I feel like they're all really well defined. And yeah, so I didn't have to wait long to watch season 2 like some of y'all, because I finished season 1 like 3 days ago. So here we are.
And here we are. And so now we're here at the season 2 premiere. I share your thoughts as well. This is the best filmmaking on television. No question about it. The season 2 is all shot on film, and you can tell right from the get-go because it's so grainy. And number one, we got to stop fetishizing film stock like it's so significantly better than digital. But it does look beautiful, this episode and the whole series, obviously. Sam Levinson, the writer and director of this season 2 premiere, the creator of the show, he just has he has a very creative eye. He knows how to get shots that I've just never seen before. There's one particular shot in this episode before we actually start breaking down. There's one shot where Rue is up on the balcony at the house party, and the camera zooms in on her, and then she turns, and as she turns, everything goes black, and then she is just spotlighted, and it's clearly that's shot on a stage, whereas the house was a separate thing. So they either had to have the camera rigged to shoot it the exact same way in 2 locations, or they had to have had complete control over the lighting. I don't know how they did it, but it's one of those shots that makes you just go wow, this is second, third, fourth, fifth level filmmaking going on. So shout out to Sam Levinson as a director, and shout out to the lighting department, the grip department, everyone that works on the show is in a league above every other show on television.
Right. I think, if you haven't watched this show, first of all, it's weird to watch a season 2, episode 1 review of a show you haven't seen. But if I was talking to someone who hadn't seen the show, if not just for the story, just watch it for the visuals in the show, because it's really impressive and it's stuff that I haven't seen done on any other television show.
Right. It's truly, because we've been talking about this, not you and I specifically, but the larger culture, the collective we have been talking about the death of movies and how independent cinema is going to television, and all of these independent filmmakers are deciding to, Sam Esmail with Mr. Robot, even going back to Vince Gilligan with Breaking Bad in some ways. That whole group of people they're all moving towards television. But still, when they get to television, for the most part, it feels like television. And that's not to disparage it. It's not to say that television is less or more than film, but it's different. This is the rare case where it actually does feel like film. And they're really putting a filmmaking masterclass on, like I already said. Characters are all super strong. It is one of the shows that makes me feel so tense more than any other show on TV. I really do. My heart does beat. And that's really rare for me, because I don't have strong emotional feelings when I'm watching movies and TV anymore, because I'm so, I don't know, I've just watched so many of them, and I'm watching the gears instead of
the formula that goes into it.
Yeah. So with this show though, 1, because the characters are so well defined, and then 2, because the situations are so intense on their own, the show just makes my heart beat and beat and beat and beat. So that was the case in this episode too. So let's break this episode down sort of into 2 parts. We have, because that's how the episode breaks itself down. We start off with the Fez flashback, which I was super here for, because I'm a big Fez guy. We're a pro Fez podcast here. So we get the flashback, and then we get current day drug dealings with Fez and Rue and Ashtray. And then after that, we go to the house party stuff. So the episode is sort of broken into those two molds. Let's start with the Fez stuff, though. Walk me through that flashback and what you got out of it, if you enjoyed it. Like, what was that for you?
Well, first of all, just like that storytelling device in general, especially for like, a season 1 and to an extent season 2, when you don't know all the characters, I think that's a like really great way to introduce characters, especially in a show that is largely an ensemble show such as this one. Like, it feels like it lets me know, it informs me of the characters' motivations and making a lot of decisions, which I really appreciate. As for this specific backstory and little vignette to open it up, thoroughly enjoyed it. I think, the opening line, Fez's grandma was a motherfucking G, is such an incredible line to open up an episode. Like, it's the type of line that, like, if you're writing a script, you could like just write that on the first line and then you just go from there.
Yeah.
Thoroughly just enjoyed this little vignette here. I think Fez is a super interesting character, which I hope we get to see more of this year.
Yeah, he was already really interesting in season 1, and so this is just even more illuminating, getting to know like what his grandma was like and how Ashtray became a part of the family, and
his name's Ashtray.
And his name's Ashtray. It's so funny. Yeah, I loved all of that. He's doing something that is so morally deplorable. He's selling drugs and like it effectively ruining people's lives. But he's also like so sweet and so kind and so generous, and we see that later in the house party stuff too. And he's just full of contradictions and complications, and knowing a little bit more about how he got into this whole world, it's just illuminating. It's very nice. And I did think it was so odd though, to have your season 2 premiere, which comes out years after season 1, be like a Fez backstory.
2.5 years later.
Yeah. It just jumped right in, which I think is interesting, because if you're watching the show as a live viewer, it might be a little jarring to just jump back into like a Fez backstory. But as you watch it years to come, as you just go through the episodes, as you binge it, as you stream it, it probably just flows perfectly into season 2 as if there was no end to season 1.
And that's what it was like for me, for someone who had just finished up season 1, is it, just kind of jumped off right where it ended. It felt like almost like a continuation of, the previous season. I think sometimes in TV shows, like the seasons feel very different from each other and feel like we're almost talking about different stories. Mm-hmm. This just seemed kind of to flow seamlessly through that, as someone who just, just finished up season 1.
Yeah. And then we move into present day. Rue is high as a kite. This again, just talking about how well defined these characters are. When characters make decisions like this, when Rue gets high, I'm so sad and so disappointed. And so, I have so much empathy for her. And like, I see her getting high in the back of the car and I'm like, no, why, Rue? Like, why? And it's just, that's just a testament to the quality of the characters and the writing on the show. But this is where I think I'm going to break a little bit from the largely glowing reception of this premiere episode. I'm sort of two minds with this episode, because on one hand, the filmmaking is beautiful and genius, and I think it's a really fun, exciting episode of television. But on the other hand, I have two sort of core issues with this episode. One of them is this whole like drug dealing portion. The further we get into like legit Breaking Bad territory, the further disconnected I become from like what's going on, because I like that exists in the world of the show, but I like it to exist on the periphery with the Fez character. Mm-hmm. I want the characters to know how dangerous that world is, but I don't want them to jump into it that often. When we see in season 1, Rue's over at Fez's place, and then the terrifying mouse situation goes down, that was enough for me, because all you really need is to have a moment to scare the hell out of Rue, or to scare the hell out of a couple of characters, to let them know that like their luxuriously drug-filled teenage lifestyle where they kind of have no consequences because they're going to live forever because they're teenagers, mm-hmm. is not the case. Like, you doing drugs at a party is just a few steps removed from like this drug underworld that's great. That's all good. But then when we enter it in this episode, I was a little bit like, one, I feel like we've been here before. Feels like we're retreading some stuff a little bit. And then two, this feels too big. This starts to feel too big for me, because like this is a show about high school teenagers doing drugs and having sex and like making bad choices. It starts to feel a little bit too dangerous and a little bit too real for me.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's also kind of a case of like stick to what you are as a show. Like, I don't want Euphoria to be a show about drug dealing.
We don't want it to turn into Ozark or Breaking Bad.
No,
yeah.
I want, like, if I wanted to watch that, I would watch Ozark or Breaking Bad. I don't, like, I want to watch Euphoria because it's like a show about the, you know, personal and social lives of these way over dramatic high school teens that did not reflect my reality as a high schooler whatsoever. But like to see those characters in that world, I don't want to see, you know, some big boss drug dealer out here. I agree that like having the, you know, mouse come in for like one episode or two to show like how like serious this world is enough for me. I don't need them to actually, you know, dedicate time in episodes to drug dealing.
Yeah, because Fez is sort of, what I liked so much about Fez in season 1 was he was almost like a gatekeeper to a world that we just don't want Rue to get into. Like, he is the block. He's the doorstop. Like, if Rue doesn't have Fez, then she could end up in this very dangerous world, and just knowing that the dangerous world exists was enough for me. And so in this episode, yeah, they get into the drug dealer's place, and they all have to sort of strip down naked. And number one, this episode, but also the whole show, just like loves male nudity, which like nudity in general, I'm not totally here for, just for myself. Like, I would never ask an actor to get naked on camera, because I think that it's largely unnecessary. But to each their own. But if you are going to have female nudity, I think you should have an equal amount of male nudity in your show. So, you know, take that for whatever that is. But they all have to strip down, and then the show, what it does really well in this scene is it mixes like very intense, scary shit with pretty funny stuff also. Just the line that Fez has about like, can I put my drawers on and have a conversation with you? Like, the casualness with which he says that is pretty funny.
The drug dealer guy dancing around as they all. Exactly.
Yeah. And as always, the show is a jukebox full of hits, and the music is just really fun and lively and adds a lot to the show. I'm curious what the show would be like without any music.
Yeah.
I think it would be equally as compelling, but in a different way. But no, yeah, we get him dancing. And so that's all happening. And they get out unscathed. Rue gets taken into the back and like, you know, is basically assaulted, is forced to like pull her top up and take her pants off. And then they get out and she's just like, yo, that was crazy. And like, obviously that's sort of a defense mechanism, but I do feel like maybe she jumped a little bit too quickly into being like, whoa, that was a wild, crazy night. But the show does recognize that, because Fez is like, yo, that was serious. But again, it is showing you how dangerous this path of drug use is for Rue. And we know that like, if she doesn't get clean, she's going to die. In a very, very real way.
Right. So I think, you know, kind of sums up that first half of the episode, the first, you know, quarter, third, whatever it was.
Then we move into really the second portion of the episode, which sort of splits into pairs of characters. It's all centered around this house party. And again, this is, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I love a party scene or a party episode in any shows or film. I think there's just so much cool stuff you can do with it.
And what's funny is like, this is sort of where, again, I'm getting sort of split minded, because as I just said, I don't love that they're going so big with the drug dealing world. On the other hand, the whole house party thing felt like we were swimming in circles a little bit.
It's like the same as the first episode. Yeah. It's like another big party. And then it makes me think, how much can you actually do then with the show? If you don't want to blow it out and get super big and then involve this whole drug dealing world, but you still want to stay small. The only thing that these characters will do in high school is go to parties, you know, and like do drugs and like get into small little altercations with each other. So this episode was great, but also it just made me a little bit worried for the future, because
I don't want them to go too big, but I don't want them to repeat themselves too much either.
And I think that just like kind of speaking big picture, not about necessarily Euphoria alone, but is like an issue that I think, you know, shows find with doing like high school based shows is there really is only so far that like you can go out of your high school bubble world before it gets like, okay, this is just absolutely insane now and something completely different.
Right.
So I don't think it's a unique problem to Euphoria.
No, certainly not. And again, the characters are so good that like you can have a shot as they do in the house party scene where like the camera, there's no dialogue. The camera just moves over to like Nate, and then he looks over at Maddie, and Maddie looks over at McKay, who's looking over at Cassie, and like nothing has to be said. You know how everyone feels about each other. Again, just really well written show to get us to a point where we don't have to say anything. We can just have characters looking at each other, and we know all these interconnected, weird little relationships. And so let's start with Nate and Cassie. I was a little bit disappointed with the direction that they decided to take Cassie in this episode. We're coming out of season 1 where she's just gone through like a tremendous amount of emotional trauma, and her and McKay are seemingly no longer together as indicated by this episode. And so she's totally wasted. She's in a parking lot of like a 7-Eleven or some gas station and meets up with Nate, and then they end up at the party hooking up. And
I gotta say, that scene in the car was too much for me. Like, too much tension for me.
That was...
When she, like, took off her seatbelt then, and they're going, like, 105 miles an hour, and she's hanging out the window, I'm like, oh, no, something bad's gonna happen here. Yeah,
and that was scary. Nate... like, I think Nate is a valuable character. I think that this show... I jump back and forth on whether or not this show has, like, real impactful value, or if it's, like, actually damaging. Like I don't know sometimes. But I think that the Nate character is a good contribution to culture, just because like it's a very good portrayal or depiction of toxic masculinity. And like in this episode, he's sort of, you know, there's a couple of nice subtle moments, but for the most part, he's like this like symbol of toxic masculinity. And like, he is just a true psychopath. And that's for sure when he's just driving. He's like, I am going to get drunk. I'm just going to chew bottles.
Just ripping bottles open with my teeth and downing Budweiser's going 105.
And yeah, he goes full psycho again. And I love...
Where the highway patrol at?
Where are they driving to?
Right?
Like, because it seemed like it wasn't like a highway. It seemed like it was like one of those sort of like woodsy, like back road sort of like highway thing, whatever. That was very intense. And then, yeah, they end up back at the party in the bathroom hooking up. And again, I like this episode. It started to feel a little farcical though. Because they're having sex up against the door, which is the weirdest place to be doing that in a bathroom. And Maddie walks over. Nate says, hey, give me a minute. And she recognizes his voice. And then Cassie and Nate are like having a conversation.
Maddie doesn't
hear it, which is insane. Music's blaring. I get it. But it just felt like it felt a little farcical to me. How did it read to you? Like that whole sequence?
Yeah. Farcical, I think, is the right word to use here. It just, something felt just kind of off about it. Like felt like almost out of place a little bit in just like what we've seen from the show so far. It
felt a little bit like abusive towards her.
Yeah.
I don't know. I felt kind of weird about it because like she doesn't get a real resolution in this episode. Last time we see her, she's dancing in those beautiful like slow-mo photo still-ish type.
Almost like Polaroid picture looking-esque.
And so we do get like a final shot of her, but like there's no real resolution within the episode for her. She just sort of like...
How did you feel about like the payoff of that whole, you know, bathroom caught scene where like at the end they just walk out? Like the guy's like, there's a passed out girl in here. And she's like, okay, want to dance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one, it's very much within Maddie's character. Two, again, that is super farce for nothing. That's also part of why I feel like this episode was like weirdly abusive towards Cassie. It's because like she's miserable to begin with. And then she hooks up with Nate thinking that that's going to solve her problems. And then he's so mean to her. He's like, why are you crying right now? And then she's stuck in a bathtub, terrified. Phone goes off.
Gets a pee towel thrown on her. And then she has to go have a conversation with McKay where she has to admit, like, I don't think I'm a good person. And like, that's the whole episode for her. Yeah.
It felt like really, it was a bit rough for Cassie, especially coming out of what she was going through in season 1. So I hope that all of this is clearly intentional and they have a come to Jesus sort of moment for her in the next couple of episodes where she recognizes all the shit that's going on, and like then her character arc for the season starts, you know?
I'm right there with you. I'm not a big fan of when characters are just like perpetually stuck in misery. So I would like to see her get something go her way and get some sort of positive outcome here.
So that's like the Cassie stuff. The one more thing I just want to talk about with in relation to that is when McKay and Nate are having their conversation later in the episode. That's one of my favorite moments in the episode because like Nate is such a psycho. He's like, one, he's physically imposing. He's so much taller than McKay. So he's like really bending over him.
He's completely hunched over him.
Just slithering like a snake and saying just like the grossest stuff. And the repression is like so clear. And McKay is so uncomfortable. Again, I think sometimes it can be a little bit overly heightened, but you can say that about the whole show, really. But it's attempting to explain why bad men are bad men, and that's what I appreciate about the Nate character, because they try their best to examine that, and the psychology there is clear, I guess, is just what I want to say. Like I think he's a well articulated character, and that particularly was just psychotic behavior, but also like in a heightened way, something that we have seen out of people in high school, or at least I have. You've heard those sorts of conversations from like gross dudes at social gatherings. And this is just a heightened version of that. So, shout out to Nate for being a psycho. And we'll come back to Nate with what happens at the end of the episode. Then we have, Rue's getting high. All that stuff is going on. She almost dies.
New character introduced.
Yeah, new character introduced. She almost dies, which in another episode, that would be like the whole point of the episode. But in this episode, I'm just going to brush past it.
It's kind of just a throwaway.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, she's really messed up right now.
She's got a lot of problems with drugs.
But then the bigger thing for Rue this episode is her and Jules get to have another come together. And at first, it's very emotionally stunted.
So I haven't seen the second special episode yet, but like, how long did Jules go away for?
That's a great question.
Because it doesn't seem like it was that long.
No, it wasn't that long. She went away to New York, and I forget how long she was there for, but it wasn't very long because this is New Year's. So
like, I know they had a Halloween episode at one point, and then there was episodes following that.
Yeah, and they had like the dance was probably like some sort of winter formal thing. So probably early December. So it's probably just been a few weeks. Real Euphoria heads will know the answer to this.
Let us know in the comments section below.
Let us know. If you haven't seen that episode, that in between episode, it's kind of weird that Jules just shows up again, because she leaves at the end of season 1,
right? And
so now she's just back, and so you kind of,
she still has to go to school.
Yeah, she still has to go to school. So it's that was a little bit strange if you haven't seen that, but also you probably would just brush right past it. The thing though that really got me was, again, I was a little disappointed that they sort of solved the problem at the end of this episode. I thought that was going to just be Rue passed out high having a dream, and then it was going to hard cut to her passed out on the floor, and like Jules is like, "Oh, Rue, wake up!" But no, that actually happened.
Yeah,
at the end of the episode, they pretty much just bury the hatchet right there, and that could have been the whole first half of this season. I thought that they kind of burned through that arc a little quick.
Yeah, I thought that, based on where we left in season 1, that their fractured relationship would be somewhat of a driving force in season 2, or at least initially. But that kind of seems like that's all, all good now.
And I'm sure it'll be a little bit uncomfortable and weird, and they'll go back and forth between yes and no. But it was a bit surprising to me. I thought that they made some surprising choices, not necessarily good or bad, just sort of odd, with Cassie, as I just mentioned, and then with Rue and Jules seemingly getting back together.
I will say about just like this whole episode in general, like I enjoyed it and I enjoyed watching it, but it seemed a little messy to me. Like almost like they had too much time to think about it and kind of like overthought things. I'm interested to see where the season goes from here, though.
I have a feeling that this will be the worst episode of the season.
See, the episode 1 was the worst episode of season 1, too. There's just too much going on in that one.
The show is so dense, and there's so many characters, and so much is going on, and it's so heightened. It's operatic and insane, and the music is just blaring. It's quite a sensory overload. So I think that part of the reaction that we have is also that, because in many ways we haven't had the show, or at least I haven't had the show for 2 years now. So getting back into its rhythm is difficult. Like I said, part of the problem is it felt a little bit like it was retreading old storylines. It felt like it was almost trying to reacclimate you to the...
It's like resetting the scene for what's going on.
It's like, hey, we know we've been away for a long time. Let's have a classic Euphoria episode where we just have a house party and there's drugs, and just don't forget about everything that happened.
There's drugs and people are fucking and...
Yeah, and God, I mean, again, where were these parties when we were in high school?
Right?
And why was I not invited?
Because we were losers.
That's true.
I'll speak for myself.
But there's losers at this party too.
That's true.
How they get invited?
Dude, this dude with the long hair who's hosting it, who's like, 1 minute till New Year's, everyone. That dude looks like a loser.
That guy is a loser.
There's a literal child at this party in ashtray.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all going on. Then one of my favorite little smaller parts of the episode is Fez and the Maud Apatow character, whose name I'm completely forgetting. Lexi.
Damn, Lexi. You like the coolest person here.
Yeah. Do you believe in God? Hell yeah, I believe in God. That was one of my favorite things, because I think I personally identify with that part of the party more than anything else at the party, because it's like, yeah, if I was at that party, I would just be sitting on the couch like Lexi. Drug dealers, like they're of like a certain sort of code. They got rules, and he's so sweet to her, and he's so nice, and that really is who he is. But also, Nate needs to get fucked up right now.
Right.
And he doesn't necessarily take pleasure in it. He like is cold and calculated about it, and like strikes in order to make a point, because the rules are the rules. And in him being of those two things, again, it's just characters that are complicated and full of contradictions, and like can be multiple things at once. That's why I love that scene, is because it really sets us up well for what happens with Nate at the end of the episode.
Yeah, I think in this whole episode we really get the juxtaposition of who Fez is and what he does, and those aren't, necessarily the same thing.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm worried for him though now, because in this whole party in front of everyone, he just bashed in this dude's skull. This dude who has a daddy who's like the head honcho in the town. So I'm a little worried about our boy Fez going forward.
Fez is dead. Fez is going to die. That's 100% happening, because they're not going to kill Nate. Nate's going to, again, I don't know if I want this or not, but like, I think Nate is just going to grow. Like the tumor is just going to grow as the show goes on, and he's just going to become more of like a bad guy, like more of a psycho. I think.
Yeah, he was already beating people up like before and like strong arming them into doing stuff.
Yeah, he's the biggest piece of shit on television, and like there are there's so many characters on television that are so awful, but like in terms of just the psychology of a character, this is like one of the worst dudes on TV, and so. I very much worry about the safety of Fez, because Nate's not going to let that slide. Again, I do worry about where the show goes if Nate starts getting people killed. Right. Because when he called the cops on Fez, that was enough for me to be like, oh yeah, Nate really sucks. Like he really is a piece of shit. Or when he is like sort of extorting Jules, and all of that was enough to say that Nate was terrible. I worry that he's going to retaliate and Fez is going to get murdered and the show is going to reach into like mid 2000s CW show.
Right.
This is the most consequential thing about this episode, no doubt, is that that Fez destroys Nate's face. And so Nate's going to be pretty angry this season.
I think he's always pretty angry.
He's always pretty angry. He's a very deeply repressed dude.
There's a lot of stuff going on there. There's a lot of layers to that onion.
Really, yeah. Any other loose threads you want from this episode? Any final thoughts? Because that's pretty much the majority of it. I thought for the most part, Jules and Kat didn't get much time this episode, which was a little disappointing.
But like on the other hand, like I'm okay with not every character getting run every episode.
For sure.
Because you only have, so many minutes, and I'd rather you like give me some like good cohesive stories in the episode as opposed to like just throwing in characters for the sake of it. But yeah, not a lot of run for those people. I was a big fan of Fez's sweater.
Yes. And as soon as he takes it off, it's going down.
And Lexi knows too. She got a look on her face that she knows like, oh no, what's this guy going to do?
Yeah.
I think that's the thread I'm somewhat interested in, is how does that relationship go? Are we going to get more of those two characters this season? Because they were just like kind of background characters in previous seasons. Yeah.
That's like the rookie off the bench. I'm like, oh, there's a lot of untapped potential there. One, because I think Maude Apatow is just a very talented actor. And then two, I think that there's a lot going on with a character like that whose sister is the belle of the ball, so to speak. Everybody wants to be with Cassie. And like her sister, Lexi, is like this book smart, very well-spoken,
dressed up as Bob Ross for Halloween.
Like, I love that person,
right,
like in real life. And I think that she is like an interesting character that should be explored more. And also it's like absurd that she's like the bookish sister, because she's beautiful also.
Right.
Everyone on the show is gorgeous. So yeah, that's the season 2 premiere. What do you think about this episode?
Whether I like the episode or not, it leaves me curious for what they do with the rest of the season. Because there's a lot of different directions they can go. And I think some of those directions are good and some not so good. So I want to see, I'm hoping they make the right choices.
100% agreed. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Nothing Notable podcast. Tune in every week to hear Euphoria season 2 recaps and then other things as well. NFL, NBA. We've also got movie reviews and other TV show reviews. Our Snowpiercer review just hit 3,000 views for no reason. So hang out with us, check it out, watch along with whatever we're watching. Check out the Noah Baumbach series. We're going to get back into that soon. And again, thank you for listening.